Did you know that in North Korea's Camp 22, prisoners have been known to survive on rats and insects just to avoid starvation? From Venezuela's La Sabaneta, where gangs ruled the prison like a kingdom, to America's ADX Florence, where the world's most dangerous criminals live in near-total isolation, these prisons are unlike anything you've ever imagined. Here are the 20 brutal prisons with the most terrifying punishments. 1. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. Black Dolphin Prison, officially known as Penal Colony Number 6, is one of Russia's most terrifying correctional facilities. It's located near the border with Kazakhstan and has earned its nickname from a sculpture of a black dolphin created by inmates, placed at the entrance. This prison is reserved for the worst criminals imaginable: murderers, cannibals, and terrorists. Life inside Black Dolphin is brutal. Prisoners are kept in cells with triple steel doors and are under 24-hour surveillance. They're isolated from the world and other inmates. Even when moved between buildings, prisoners are blindfolded, so they can't map out the layout of the prison. Guards use a unique escort method. Inmates are bent at the waist with their handcuffed arms lifted behind their backs. This prevents them from seeing or reacting to their surroundings. From the moment they wake up until bedtime, prisoners aren't allowed to sit or rest. It's a grueling existence, filled with strict routines and a constant watchful eye. 2. ADX Florence, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, is America's most secure prison. Located in Colorado, it's designed for prisoners who are considered too dangerous or high-profile for regular maximum security prisons. Here, you'll find terrorists, serial killers, and gang leaders like the Unabomber and the Boston Marathon bomber. The prison's design focuses on extreme isolation. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in concrete cells with almost no human interaction. The cells have a bed, a toilet, a sink, and a tiny slit of a window that only shows the sky. Prisoners get 1 hour a day outside their cell, but even this freedom happens in a small, enclosed area under heavy security. Many are restrained with handcuffs and shackles. Over time, this isolation takes a heavy mental toll. Reports of inmates talking to themselves or suffering from severe psychological issues are common. La Sabaneta Prison, Venezuela. La Sabaneta Prison in Venezuela was one of the most dangerous prisons in the world before its closure in 2013. Located in Maracaibo, it was infamous for overcrowding, gang violence, and horrifying living conditions. Imagine a facility built for 700 inmates crammed with over 3,700 people. This was La Sabaneta. Life inside was chaotic. The prison was essentially run by the inmates themselves, with gangs controlling daily life. The Pran, or inmate leader, held all the power, making survival dependent on alliances or bribes. Violence was common, and deaths were frequent due to fights, riots, and poor medical care. Guards rarely intervened, and at times, only a handful of officers were on duty to manage thousands of prisoners. Basic necessities like food, water, and hygiene were in short supply. Diseases spread rapidly, and the weak were often left to fend for themselves. In one infamous riot in 1994, over 150 inmates died in a fire, and the chaos that followed. 4. Gikondo Prison, Rwanda. Gikondo Prison, located in Kigali, Rwanda, is infamous for its overcrowding and harsh conditions. Originally built in the 1930s to house a few thousand inmates, the numbers skyrocketed after the Rwandan genocide, holding over 50,000 people at its peak. It became a holding ground for those awaiting trial for war crimes in Gacaca courts. Life inside Gikondo was incredibly harsh. Overcrowding made it nearly impossible for inmates to move, let alone live comfortably. Since 2006, Gikondo has also been known as a transit center, where street children, homeless people, and others deemed undesirable by authorities are detained. Human rights organizations have criticized these actions, highlighting the abuse and lack of legal process involved. Bang Kwang Prison, Thailand. Bang Kwang Prison, nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, is one of Thailand's most notorious prisons. Located just north of Bangkok, it's known for its harsh conditions and for housing death row inmates and long-term prisoners. One of the most shocking things about Bangkwang is the use of leg irons. Inmates used to have these welded onto their legs permanently, especially those on death row. Although this practice ended in 2013, the prison's reputation for harsh treatment remains. New prisoners are required to wear leg irons for the first 3 months, making daily life even more difficult. 6. Ognenny Ostrov, Russia. Ognenny Ostrov, or Fire Island, is one of Russia's most unique and infamous prisons. Located on a small island in Lake Novozero, about 460 kilometers north of Moscow, it's officially called Volогодsky Pyatak. This prison is reserved for some of Russia's most dangerous criminals, all serving life sentences or those whose death sentences were commuted when Russia imposed a death penalty moratorium in 1996. The prison has a fascinating history. It started as a Russian Orthodox monastery in 1517 after a monk claimed to see a column of fire strike the island. The monastery was later converted into a prison during the Soviet era, initially housing political prisoners and victims of Stalin's purges. Today, it holds around 193 inmates, all considered too dangerous to be anywhere else. Camp 22 in North Korea, officially known as Huryong concentration camp, was one of the country's most brutal and secretive prisons. Located in a remote part of the country, this massive facility covered 225 square kilometers and was surrounded by electric fences, barbed wire, and landmines. It held around 50,000 prisoners at its peak, including entire families, due to North Korea's guilt by association policy. The conditions in Camp 22 were horrific. Prisoners were subjected to forced labor in mines and factories for up to 15 hours a day, with minimal food, mostly just a small portion of corn. Starvation was rampant, and prisoners often resorted to eating rats or insects to survive. Children were forced to work from a young age and rarely lived past 10 due to malnutrition. The elderly faced the same grueling conditions as younger adults. Torture was common, with guards using methods like hanging prisoners upside down, water torture, and even the so-called pigeon torture, where prisoners were tied to a wall in a crouching position for hours. Public and secret executions were routine, and escape attempts were met with collective punishment. Entire families of the escapee would be killed. 8. El Rodeo Prison, Venezuela. El Rodeo Prison, located near Caracas, Venezuela, was one of the country's most overcrowded and violent facilities. Designed to hold a limited number of inmates, it became home to thousands, with rival gangs controlling life inside the prison walls. Conditions in El Rodeo were chaotic and dangerous. Gang violence was rampant, and fights often escalated into full-blown riots. In 2011, a deadly riot resulted in 22 deaths and a month-long standoff between inmates and National Guards. Prisoners were heavily armed, with access to guns and grenades smuggled in through corrupt guards. The government had little control over the prison, making it a lawless zone run by gang leaders. Overcrowding was another major issue. Venezuelan prisons were operating at double their intended capacity, and inmates lived in filthy, cramped quarters with inadequate access to food, water, and medical care. In 2011, President Hugo Chavez announced plans to release nearly half of the country's inmates to ease overcrowding. Despite these efforts, the problems persisted. 9. San Pedro Prison, Bolivia. San Pedro Prison in La Paz, Bolivia, is unlike any other prison in the world. It operates more like a small city than a traditional correctional facility. Inmates have to pay for their cells, work inside the prison, and often live with their families. It's a place where prisoners can run restaurants, shops, and even hold elections for leadership roles within the prison. Life inside San Pedro is a mix of chaos and self-governance. Wealthier inmates can buy luxurious cells with private bathrooms and even hot tubs, while poorer inmates share cramped spaces. One of the most infamous aspects of San Pedro was its illegal tourist trade. Before 2009, tourists could pay to take guided tours of the prison, complete with overnight stays in the so-called prison hotel. Some inmates even sold cocaine to visitors, making a significant profit. This bizarre practice was eventually shut down, but it left a lasting mark on the prison's reputation. 12th, Pulicharki Prison, Afghanistan. Pulicharki Prison, Afghanistan's largest detention facility, is infamous for its brutal past and harsh conditions. Built in the 1970s, it quickly became a symbol of terror during the communist regime. Political prisoners were tortured and executed en masse, with some estimates suggesting up to 27,000 people lost their lives here during the late 1970s. Conditions in the prison have always been dire. Overcrowding is a persistent issue, with thousands of inmates crammed into a facility that can't accommodate them. Basic needs like food, water, and medical care are often insufficient, leaving prisoners to suffer in squalor. Women and children have also been detained, with female inmates housed in a separate section. The prison has been the site of riots and violent incidents. In one infamous event in 2006, inmates took control of a wing after a protest about wearing uniforms escalated into violence. 13. Nairobi Prison, Kenya. Nairobi's Kamiti Maximum Security Prison is notorious for its overcrowding, inhumane conditions, and history of brutality. Originally designed to hold around 1,400 inmates, it now houses over 3,600, leading to extreme overcrowding and poor sanitation. Inmates live in cramped cells, often hauling water buckets to meet basic needs due to the lack of a reliable water supply. The prison has a dark history, especially during the colonial era and the 1980s. It housed political prisoners like Mau Mau, leader Dedan Kimathi, and was the site of many executions. Even today, death row inmates reside in G Block, infamous for its violent and predatory environment, including rampant abuse and exploitation among prisoners. Evin Prison, Iran. Evin Prison in Tehran, Iran is infamous for its harsh treatment of political prisoners and human rights abuses. Built in the 1970s under the Shah's regime, it has served as a detention center for dissidents and intellectuals both before and after the Iranian Revolution. Nicknamed Evin University, it has housed countless activists, journalists, and political figures. Conditions inside Evin are grim. Overcrowding, torture, and psychological abuse are common. Reports detail prisoners being subjected to beatings, forced confessions, and even sexual violence. Solitary confinement cells, known as coffins, are used to break inmates psychologically. Despite these allegations, Iranian authorities deny any mistreatment. Evin has also been the site of protests and tragic incidents. In 2022, during nationwide demonstrations, a fire broke out in the prison, with gunfire and violence reported. Families of prisoners gathered outside, demanding answers amid chaotic scenes. 15th. Kresty Prison, Russia, was once Europe's largest detention center and is infamous for its overcrowding and harsh conditions. Built in the 19th century, the prison's cross-shaped design earned it the name Kresty, meaning crosses. It was initially considered state-of-the-art, but over time, conditions deteriorated. The prison was designed for 1,150 inmates, but often housed more than double that number, leading to severe overcrowding. Cells were cramped, poorly ventilated, and lacked basic hygiene facilities. Inmates lived in harsh conditions, enduring freezing winters and hot summers in a facility that barely met minimum standards. In 2017, the prison was closed, and inmates were relocated to a more modern facility called Kresty-2.16. Rikers Island, USA. Rikers Island, located in New York City, is one of the most infamous jails in the U.S., known for its violence and poor conditions. Spread across a 400-acre island in the East River, Rikers holds thousands of inmates, most of whom are awaiting trial or serving short sentences. Life on Rikers is dangerous. Reports of abuse, gang violence, and neglect are widespread. Inmates and staff alike face constant threats, with assaults and riots being frequent occurrences. Overcrowding and underfunding make conditions even worse, and the facility has been criticized for inadequate mental health services. One of the biggest controversies surrounding Rikers is its cost. It takes over $550,000 a year to house a single inmate, making it one of the most expensive correctional facilities in the world. Despite this, the the quality of life for inmates remains poor. 17. Château d'If, France. The Château d'If, located on a small island near Marseille, France, is a historical fortress-turned-prison. Built in the 16th century, it became infamous for housing political and religious prisoners in harsh, isolated conditions. It's best known as the setting for Alexandre Dumas' novel, The Count of Monte Cristo. Prisoners were treated based on their social status. Wealthier inmates could pay for better conditions, while poorer prisoners were left in dark, damp cells with little food or comfort. The isolation was severe, and many inmates succumbed to illness or despair. 18. Tadmor Prison, Syria. Tadmor Prison, located in the Syrian desert, was notorious for its extreme violence and mass executions. Initially built as a French military barracks, it became a high-security prison under the Assad regime. Its name became synonymous with torture and inhumanity. Inmates were subjected to horrific conditions, including overcrowding, starvation, and brutal torture methods. Mass executions were common, with prisoners often killed without trial. The infamous 1980 massacre saw hundreds of inmates slaughtered in a single day as a response to an assassination attempt on the president. Although Tadmor was closed in 2001, its grim legacy remains a powerful symbol of Syria's history of repression. It reopened briefly in 2011 before being destroyed by ISIS in 2015. 19. La Modelo Prison, Colombia. La Modelo Prison in Bogotá, Colombia is infamous for its violence and chaos. Designed to house around 2,400 inmates, it often holds over 10,000, leading to extreme overcrowding and poor living conditions. The prison is effectively divided between rival factions, with guards having little control. Smuggling of weapons, drugs, and contraband is rampant, fueling frequent violent clashes between inmates. One of the most notorious incidents occurred in 2020 when a riot over COVID-19 conditions left dozens dead. 20. Carandiru Penitentiary, Brazil. Carandiru Penitentiary in São Paulo, Brazil, was once one of the largest and most violent prisons in the world. Built in the 1950s, it was designed to house 4,000 inmates but often held over 8,000, leading to horrific overcrowding. The prison became infamous for the 1992 massacre, when a riot led to a violent police crackdown. Over 100 inmates were killed, many of them unarmed. The incident highlighted the brutal conditions and lack of control within the prison. Carandiru was finally closed in 2002, but its legacy of violence and neglect remains a dark chapter in Brazil's history. Which of these prisons shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more gripping content, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload.